A favorite game of mine that I scarcely talk about is the 2014 title Shovel Knight. It's a very solid package that feels complete on its own. In fact, that's probably the reason why I don't talk about it at all. There really isn't a whole lot to digest since new content stopped coming out in 2019, and it's not a game that I really have any unique takes on or anything. It's pretty universally agreed upon as amazing. However, there were a few spin-offs planned after the game finished production: Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon and Shovel Knight Dig. One of these games was released last December after 2 years of waiting, and I've 100% completed it. That being said, I have some problems with it. Don't get me wrong, the game on the whole is pretty great. The sprite work, while animated in ways I'm not particularly fond of, is charming. The roguelike design is very promising, and the huge roster of playable characters with strange and compelling playstyles is certainly very nice. The little plot between Prism Knight and Puzzle Knight, two characters introduced for this game, is also pretty sweet as well. It's a nice story about a family. However, my biggest issue with this game has to do with the difficulty. That is, the game starts out way too hard. I've gotten used to navigating Pocket Dungeon's difficulty. I 100%ed the game on the normal mode before I realized that the normal mode in this game probably isn't the best way to play. It took me a week to beat the game and get the regular ending. I always play games on the default difficulty setting because I think that's how they were intended to be played, but Pocket Dungeon's default difficulty is a mess for beginners and almost turned me off from playing the game entirely. Basically, in Pocket Dungeon, there are two major things that the player has to keep track of in order to avoid dying. Their HP, which will make them restart if they lose, and it's pretty standard for roguelikes, or the board filling up with things, because it doubles as a Tetris-esque block falling game. This is very challenging as the board fills up very quickly, and enemies always deal damage to you when you attack them unless you have certain upgrades that negate it or you hit them on the killing blow. Every time you hit an enemy, they hit back. None of this is a bad system, but there is very little room for error. If you die to any enemy, back to the beginning of the game. If you aren't able to handle all the incredibly fast falling monsters on the board, back to the beginning of the game. It's really difficult. Unlike most roguelikes, you can't really progress in any meaningful way either. The only way you can progress from the main camp is by buying items that appear in stores in the dungeon itself, but you still have to buy them when you're in the dungeon itself, and they're temporary, which again doesn't lead to a very strong feeling of progression. There's no way for you to get stronger over the course of the game, and a lot of progression further into the Pocket Dungeon feels up to luck because you can't memorize the randomized board layouts for obvious reasons. I think the biggest reason why this disappointed me so much when I first played the game was that I came into it with the prior context of having played Shovel Knight first, and engaging my expectations with that. Shovel Knight is a much more forgiving game in terms of its difficulty. Shovel Knight is challenging, but you don't have to restart the entire game with every mistake, and you can also memorize the levels and get stronger as the game progresses. You acquire upgrades and more items and learn more about how the particular character you're playing as in that campaign controls. Pocket Dungeon doesn't really take advantage of that at all. You just have to use certain RNG in order to get certain relics for most characters, or else you're pretty screwed. If you can't clear out enemies on a screen fast enough, you're guaranteed to be dead, and those enemies will often kill you, especially in later levels where they have huge health bars to kill you before you can kill them. Looking at you, Crabstools. However, Pocket Dungeon's greatest strength in this department is that you can just change all of this in the settings. This is told to you by Puzzle Knight at the very beginning of the game, so maybe it was my fault for being a stickler for playing games on default difficulties, but you can make the game much more reasonable. Worried about the board filling up too quickly? You can just make it so time only moves when you move. Worried about having to reset if you die? Don't worry, just turn on infinite lives. It's amazing to me how far accessibility in gaming has come to the point where things like this are widely accepted and welcomed. However, I think that at the very least, infinite lives should have been the default. Having to restart the game with little to no progress just isn't satisfying. You didn't learn anything from that run, you didn't gain anything from that run in-game. Even the items that you can buy to be bought during your runs run out pretty quickly. So really, it's just a game where you don't really feel like you're making any progress due to the absurdly high difficulty ceiling, and I think feelings like that should be reserved for a hard mode. Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon is another incredibly solid entry in the Shovel Knight series. Though obviously not as amazing as the original Shovel Knight, I don't really think any game could have been on that level. Pocket Dungeon uses the Shovel Knight characters and setting pretty excellently, and even manages to have a pretty compelling emotional core. However, I just can't get into the game on the difficulty it wants me to get into it on. It's a frustrating trial and error process where most of your success is determined by RNG rather than anything else. It's not fun. I know that all roguelikes are built on some element of randomness, but many of them allow you to gain mastery over that randomness. Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon does not give you this chance. It's merciless. This has been Arcade Everlasting, official Mole Knight boss juggler, signing off. Thank you for watching.